And also, let's also cover UK's nuclear deterrent you just mentioned in your article for The Telegraph, that the UK should start to produce also tactical nuclear weapons. Do you see the tactical nukes as the best option for the United Kingdom to deter Russia and to retaliate in case of attack?
Well, I think it's certainly something that Britain must consider, and we have a strategic defence review that is due to report very soon, and I hope they've considered it. Because if America is going to get less involved in Europe, then the nuclear equilibrium, if you like, goes very much in favour of the Russians. It would leave just two nuclear countries in Europe, Britain and France. And although far smaller than the Russians know that there are enough strategic ballistic missiles to create, very severe damage on Russia. However, what is in complete imbalance is the tactical nuclear weapons. Britain gave up its tactical or battlefield nuclear weapons back in 1998. And although France has a few, there is a dilemma now that if Russia used a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine or maybe in the Baltic states, how Britain would respond. I think it's highly unlikely. In fact, I don't think Britain would respond with a strategic nuclear weapon. That there is very little we could do. And I think that is probably the assumption President Putin is making. However, if Britain and France had tactical nuclear weapons to be able to counter the Russians, I think that balance would be back more in equilibrium and the Russians more easily use it. I think the final piece on this, the tactical nuclear weapons are a way to generate masses of force on the local battlefield, far more than hundreds of tanks and everything else. And if you can use them with impunity, then Putin might consider it worth it. And there is a possibility that that could happen. So I would hope that Britain considers this and certainly gives something for Putin to think about, that actually it might be a sensible thing for Britain to re-establish its tactical nuclear weapon capability in order that Russia cannot use its tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine or in Europe in general.
Is the United Kingdom capable of producing new tactical nuclear weapons?
Well, that is a very good question, and probably one that one can't answer definitively. But Britain has a long history in developing nuclear capability. There is the Atomic Weapons Establishment, where Britain's nuclear weapons are maintained and developed. So I wouldn't have thought with my own expertise that would be an insurmountable problem. And Britain still has capabilities like the F-35B fighter and has hypersonic missiles that these weapons could be put on. So it's not an easy task. I would accept that, but I'm sure if Britain put its mind to it, it could produce the capability fairly quickly.
And you're confident that tactical nuclear weapons can beat Russia's mass on the battlefield in case of a global conflict, and could be the best option to retaliate if Russia attacks NATO or Ukraine with nuclear weapons, or if attacks NATO, for example, with conventional weapons?
Well, I think the key thing about nuclear weapons is the term mutually assured destruction. And the reason that we've not had global conflict since the end of the Second World War is because both the Russians and the West have had balanced nuclear weapon capability. But when it comes to tactical nuclear weapons, this is unbalanced, especially if the Americans are going to step back from supporting Europe. That's why I think it is something that Britain and France should consider, just so that there is a balance in tactical nuclear weapons, in the same way that we haven't used strategic weapons because they're balanced. I think it would make sure that the Russians didn't use their tactical nuclear weapons. So I don't see at all there'd be any first strike options by the United Kingdom. In other words, firing a tactical nuclear missile first. the key thing would be is to prevent the Russians from using their own weapons. That's why I think we potentially need to review our holdings of nuclear weapons and potentially possibly looking at redeveloping our tactical or battlefield nuclear capability.
And do you feel that the United Kingdom is ready to replace the United States in providing nuclear umbrella for other European countries?
Well, certainly the French government, President Macron has already said that that is what France will do. I think Britain and France are really working very, very closely at the moment. And although that hasn't been stated, I think it's inferred that, between Britain and France, they would provide a nuclear umbrella, a nuclear safety net, as you were, for Europe if the Americans are going to withdraw from that commitment.
And let's cover our final topic. You mentioned about the Pete Hegseth, U.S. Defense Secretary. According to CNN, Pete Hegseth also shared war plans about military operations against Houthis on a second Signal chat group. This one was on his personal phone, and this group included his wife, lawyer, and brother, according to CNN sources. What is your assessment of such a national security failure?
Well, I think it's very serious indeed. The original intelligence failure on the Signal channel, where not only multiple people, but also a journalist was copied into what was happening on some key targeting information. That was a very serious breach. So for it to happen again, I think is probably unforgivable. I can't imagine if something like this happened to members of the British government that they would still be in position. And I think also the approach of some American politicians appearing to be rather too close to the Russians in the last few months is a concern as well. I think everybody, including myself, suggested that Pete Hegseth was rather underqualified and inexperienced to hold such an important job. And these two serious intelligence gaffes have sort of underlined that particular case. And you would have thought that America could come up with somebody who is more experienced, more qualified, with a safer pair of hands, as it were, to run the American military than perhaps Pete Hegseth, who has slipped on two very, very dangerous banana skins. And, the potential for even worse to happen is absolutely there. So you would hope that President Trump realizes this and acts accordingly.
And could this development reduce intelligence sharing between American allies, between the United States and also European allies? Do you feel that European allies would be even more not ready to share all intelligence information with American colleagues, American counterparts?
Well, I think there are two levels to this. We call the working level, so sharing of intelligence between the CIA and the special intelligence services of the UK and France and Ukraine. I think that still operates very well, and that is very secure. When it comes to politicians, and of course politicians are not necessarily privy to all the intelligence, just the intelligence that they need to know. I think sharing between politicians and perhaps some government agencies might well be affected by this, and people will be more circumspect. But I think at the operational level, and particularly involved with the fighting in Ukraine, I am sure that will be unaffected by any gaffes by senior politicians in the US at the moment.
Thank you, Colonel Hamish, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much for having me. Glory to Ukraine.
Heroям слава. Thank you very much. What is Vladimir Putin trying to achieve in these negotiations right now? Because he does participate in this process. His people participate. People are meeting American colleagues in different locations around the globe. Discussions are going on right now. What are they doing? What is their objective right now in these negotiations?
I believe their objective in the negotiations is to keep the negotiations going on as long as possible. Because as long as the negotiations are going on, you can send out propaganda saying, look, we're negotiating, but this group is choosing not to engage with us, right? I think that's kind of the goal of the negotiations. It's to create the opportunity to create propaganda. And at the end of the day, what you kind of have here is once a ceasefire happens, then there's really no more room to negotiate a ceasefire, right? So that's kind of an issue. So while it might seem counterintuitive that you don't want a ceasefire, even though a ceasefire would be helpful, this is one of those things that's Russia in a nutshell, right? Russia always seems to be a little counterintuitive to what you'd expect.
And also, you're confident, according to our latest interview, that Russia will suddenly collapse. Do you feel that a ceasefire could bring the collapse of Russia closer or even more far away? How could this influence Russia's ability to exist as a state, as a united state?
Russia could certainly collapse. That is a possibility. I don't think a ceasefire would cause a collapse, but I certainly think that if certain circumstances aren't met, especially if, one of the things President Trump had talked about was secondary sanctions, where the United States sanctions countries that are purchasing Russian oil. If you get to the point where nobody wants to buy Russian oil, it becomes very, very difficult to pay soldiers. And once that happens, soldiers are going to be loyal to a point, right? They're going to be loyal to the point that once they stop getting paid, that's a problem. And if it turns out they stop getting paid, kind of the next thing that happens is they start looking for ways to make money. And that's how soldiers become a mob, right? Now, the good thing about Ukraine is that Ukraine can get some funding from Europe in order to pay their soldiers' salaries. So they're not really an issue. But once you start seeing soldiers who don't get paid, they turn into mercenaries. And once they turn into mercenaries, now you have a mob. And that isn't good.
And it was one time in the history, Prigozhin march on Moscow. Russia's mercenaries, led by Yevgeny Prigozhin, he was killed by probably Vladimir Putin, but they tried to capture Moscow to decapitate Vladimir Putin's regime. And so you're talking about this threat to the Russian regime. And that's why Kremlin is really afraid of mercenaries.
Yeah. I mean, look, every soldier is what, 2-3 meals away from becoming a mercenary, right? When you think about it, they're 2-3 paychecks away from becoming a mercenary. So that's kind of something to think about. If Russia runs out of money to fund the war, it's not going to turn out good for Russia.
There could be even chaos inside Russia and inside Vladimir Putin's inner circle regarding what we are going to do with this war and unpaid soldiers.
Yeah, that could certainly be an issue. Where, soldiers expect to get paid. And soldiers expect to have certain kinds of benefits, veterans benefits and so on. And when that goes away, you have young men who are physically fit, who are trained to use firearms. Granted, Russia's firearm laws are not as liberal as the laws of the United States, but that's never stopped young men with ideas from getting guns.
And also, let's cover recent developments on the ground. Russia has conducted another assault in the south of Ukraine. However, Russia failed to achieve any kind of success. Ukrainian army repelled this attack, and Russia faced unsustainable losses again. Do you feel that Russia is trying to achieve something that is unachievable. It's impossible to achieve something like that, to also capture even more Ukrainian land on the other side of Dnipro River, all the land Vladimir Putin claims is the Russian one.
Well, I'm sure they'd certainly like to, right? Like that is the ultimate goal. They'd certainly like to take that land. The question is whether it's actually feasible to do so. And war is hard. And amphibious invasions are pretty darn hard too, or river crossings are pretty darn hard too. And I got to tell you, you can train for something as much as you like, but Murphy's Law, I don't know if that translates well into Ukrainian. The law of whatever can go wrong will go wrong. That always seems to rear its head whenever there's any kind of military operation. And one of the huge issues with Russia is that they just don't have the non-commissioned officers, the sergeants, who can make calls on the ground and respond to changing situations.
And also you just mentioned about the military operation. United Kingdom, France and other European allies are preparing this big plan to deploy troops to Ukraine as a part of the coalition of willing after ceasefire. What is your assessment of this idea from a military point of view? Is this feasible for European allies without American backstop?
Well, I mean, yes, France and Great Britain are two of the countries that could actually provide peacekeepers, mainly because they have the logistical tail to support them. I don't know how long they would be able to do it financially, or what that would look like, specifically with having their troops rotate in and out. I think France can field 3 divisions. The UK can field 2 if they activate their reserves. So there might not be physically enough troops. They might only be able to send 1 or 2 brigades each. And so now we're talking maybe 1,200 troops. That isn't a lot to cover an entire border. When you consider, Ukraine tends to have 1 brigade on the border every, I believe it's 20 miles or so. What that translates into kilometers is 25, maybe 20, I guess 26 or so, 28, I think, 28 kilometers roughly. They have a brigade. So that's the idea of fielding 3 brigades across the entire Ukrainian front. That's just, the front is just so massive. It's very difficult to do something like this without the actual physical troops. And I don't really know how Great Britain or the UK can square that circle, at least not without using troops from third-party countries, maybe non-aligned countries like Brazil or Indonesia or Saudi Arabia.
And also another big idea to enforce air policing zone over Ukraine, to close Ukrainian skies after ceasefire, even at least over the west of Ukraine and central part of Ukraine. Would it be also feasible for UK and France to do so without American Air Force?
Yes and no. So America has a lot of the airborne warning control planes. There are shared NATO planes as well, shared NATO AWACS. They call them E-3 Sentries. I believe Great Britain and France have their own radar planes, which you would need in order to enforce a no-fly zone. However, I don't know if their software is American-made or American-owned. And that's where things get tricky, because if America says, no, I don't want you to do this, and they use American software in order to perform their air traffic control, that can be an issue, right? That can be an issue. So I believe they have the physical capacity to do so, But anything like kind of beyond what you might see with just the physical ability to move troops, that's kind of the question mark. It's the actual deals that they would have to make in order to get something like this done. That's kind of up in the air.
And also, if there is a green light from the US to conduct such mission, in your opinion, it could be possible for European allies?
I think so. I think it could be possible. Absolutely. They have the equipment. It's just I don't know whether some of that equipment has American roots, and so America would say, "Hey, you can't use this because you're using our tech," and whatever, right? Like people, things are really weird right now here. I wish I had better news for you, but things have gotten kind of weird, and I don't know where our president stands from one day to the next.
You just mentioned about President Trump. Recently, he said that the ceasefire deal could be reached as soon as even this week. How can you assess the possibility of ceasefire deal broken this week, reached this week?
Well, I think he's just saying words. Nothing's going to happen this week. It's just not. There's too much going on right now. And there's only so many hours in a day, and the president really doesn't have time to deal with absolutely everything. So, there's really not a lot. I think that can be accomplished with Ukraine this week.
And also, there is interesting opinion. So, if Donald Trump abandons Ukraine, this would not be good news for Russian dictator Putin, because if US abandons Ukraine, Europe will take a lead in this process of supporting Ukraine. What is your opinion on that?
And I didn't really believe this a couple of weeks ago, but now I'm starting to come to the conclusion that the United States abandoning Ukraine could probably be the worst possible thing for Russia. Right.
Really?
Right now, we've dangled weapons in front of Ukraine, saying, "Do what we say, or else you don't get these weapons. Do what we say, or else you don't get this satellite imagery." But kind of the issue here is that if Ukraine doesn't take the bait and respond to America's threats, then then America's threats are useless, right? And if America is trying to keep Russia in line by either funding Ukraine or defunding Ukraine, they're trying to kind of control Russia's movements with what's going on in Ukraine, then if America just takes itself out of the picture, well, now Russia has to maybe negotiate with Ukraine directly or with Europe directly. And Europe has a different view of Putin than America, right? America has these two big, beautiful oceans on either side. We're not very scared of Russia. But Europe, I've been to Europe. People are scared. And when you have something like that right next to your border, you tend to be a lot tougher than a country with two oceans, right? So, America leaving Europe to take care of this could actually be the worst thing possible for Russia.
It's really interesting that also the new German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, he supports providing Ukraine with German-made Taurus cruise missile. What is your opinion or assessment of this weaponry, of this missile, and how could they influence the situation on the ground if such missiles are being provided to Ukraine by Germany?
It's just another tool in the toolkit, right? It's not necessarily the weapon system. It's the biggest breakthrough is Germany providing offensive weapons, right? That's kind of the big deal here. It's that Germany would say, you know what, we're going to provide offensive weapons. It's not necessarily the type of weapon that's the big deal. It's the fact that they're doing offensive weapons at all. that you should kind of go, all right, yeah, that's pretty interesting. So, yeah, that's the notion that the type of cruise missile, that's not very important. It's the fact that Germany has decided to send offensive weapons. It's kind of the breakthrough here.
And you're confident that if the US abandons Ukraine, this could be the worst case scenario for Putin, and this would be more difficult for Russia to conduct negotiations with Europe, European allies, with Ukraine without American involvement.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly could be a bad outcome for Russia, and maybe a better outcome for Ukraine. It's almost like you're, I guess the best way to put it is, it's almost like the United States is a boyfriend who just keeps telling you that you're worthless. Oh, you'll be nothing without us. You know, you can't leave me because you're going to be nothing unless you have me around. And what Ukraine probably needs to do is break up and start talking to that nice boy in the European Union who has given them weapons and so on.
It's really interesting because some analysts believe that this is the reason why Putin declared one-day ceasefire just to stay in this game of negotiations, to prove Trump that he can do something, that he would like to have a peace. Do you also think so, that Putin did that just to stay in this game of negotiations?
That's certainly possible. Look, because he's competing against all the other scandals that are going on inside the United States. And there's only so much bandwidth, there's only so much air, right? So yeah, you could be absolutely right.
Thank you, Ryan, for our discussions, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.